Hello, everybody. Welcome to this BioIT World Web Symposium, New Approaches to Text Mining and Literature Workflow Management in Scientific and Clinical Research. We have two sponsors for today's program, Quotas and Linguam. You'll be hearing from both of those organizations in just a short while. As you heard, I'm Kevin Davis, editor of BioIT World, author of the $1,000 Genome, and delighted to be the moderator for today's session. Three superb speakers who are going to, whether you're kind of new to the text mining world or you're looking for some more in-depth information, advice and strategies, we'll have time for questions at the end of the three presentations. There's a chat box that you can use, and we encourage you to enter your questions during any of the three presentations, and I will do my best to squeeze as many of those in as we can in the time allotted. For questions that we can't address during the program, there will be contact information for all three of our speakers, and you will, if they approve, you'll be able to touch base with them offline. A very brief introduction from me before I bring in our first speaker then. With the relentless growth in the volume and complexity of scientific research and the competitive advantage to be gained by successfully passing that information, there is obviously intense interest in the application of novel text and data mining solutions. In today's web symposium, we hope you'll hear how valuable information can be extracted and linked together from a wide range of document sources, including full-text journal articles, electronic medical records, clinical trials, and even patents. A little later, we'll hear from senior representatives of our two sponsors of today's program, David Millwood from Linguam and Quotas Andrew Carver, who will discuss how their specific tools are enabling researchers to tactically and strategically identify targets, opportunities, and initiatives to aid drug development and translational research. And I'll introduce those two gentlemen in a little more fully as they get ready to present in the next 15 minutes or so. But first, to kick off, we wanted to get the perspective of a leading text mining expert from a big pharma organization on the latest use of text mining tools and workflows. And so we are delighted to introduce Phoebe Roberts, Dr. Phoebe Roberts, who is Associate Research Fellow in Pfizer's Computational Sciences Center of Emphasis. As the domain lead in text mining for Pfizer, Phoebe works with a variety of text miners embedded in project teams, providing expertise in vocabulary and query development, as well as matching search tools to user needs. She also explores and implements improvements to Pfizer's automated text mining pipeline, including things such as disambiguation, fact extraction, and relevancy scoring systems. Phoebe, it's a great pleasure to welcome you onto the program, and take it away.
Okay, Kevin, thanks for that wonderful introduction, and thank you everyone for calling in today. We have a large kind of internal text mining pipeline, but considering our sponsors today, I'm going to focus instead on our custom querying capabilities that we've set up using Quotas and Linguam. But just to get you warmed up, over the years, I've been doing this since about 2004, there have been common themes that come up again and again, and this is during my time in two different companies. First of all, this notion of supplementing database content comes up very frequently, and it's well known that many publicly available databases often have content gaps once you start delving into the data. A second common use case is creating novel databases. So for instance, compounds that are linked to a particular phenotype can be hard to come by in the absence of a good phenotype dictionary. Secondly, genes that have been silenced with RNAi. This is a project that we did before some of the content providers had been curating RNAi interactions in earnest. So we were able to set up a database ourselves within a few weeks or a month or so. Lastly, what proteins, when added to cells, effect a response, and what is the response? This is a great example where there's directionality implicit, where the protein named has to be upstream and directing the response rather than the response resulting in a change in a protein. So it's nice to be able to get that level of detail in the kinds of relationships that we mine. A second batch of questions refers to answering specific questions, and we get a lot around kinetic parameters or concentrations of a target, so specific values that are typically buried in full text. For example, what's called closed discovery. This is when you need to find indirect relationships between a specific gene and a disease. If there's very little or no literature that connects a gene to a disease, then going by intermediating entities is a great way to build a case. So we often see that when there's kind of a spurious adverse event that pops up, and we're trying to tie it back to a target. And whether we mine abstract or full text really depends on two things. And so if you're starting from absolute scratch, it's usually sufficient just to see what you can get out of the abstracts. Abstracts are much easier to mine in general than full text. But if the information is typically found only in full text, then that's where you need to go. Fortunately, if you're new to this area, there's actually quite a bit of research that's already been done for you once you start to poke into the corners of PubMed that may not have caught your attention before. So there have been two papers in the mid-2000s where both authors were looking at where certain entities were most frequently mentioned. One thing that stands out from the Schumi et al. Paper is that there's a 2.5-fold enhancement of the mention of chemicals and drugs outside of the abstract. So if you're looking for mentions of these kinds of entities, then full text is a better bet. Similarly, when the mention of certain terms is grouped by the section of the paper, in general for abstracts, we see that there's a lot of overlap. The terms that are in the abstract have a lot of overlap with other sections. But if you go to something like methods, then this is usually only where you'll see certain terms. So again, if you're not sure whether to go to full text or whether abstracts will be sufficient, there is some great literature out there that can help you make up your mind. We have a full text pipeline when the situation calls for it, and the first step there is with Quota. And so you'll be hearing more from Andrew Carver, but Quota is a really nice way where one window of the application puts you in your favorite and familiar search interface. So you run a query as you always would, but the ability to pull down en masse as many articles as your institution allows is a really powerful tool. Then the real benefit of licensing Quota is this ability to export it as an XML file. What we've done is create a pipeline pilot script that will take the Quota output and load it into I2E, but we've also used Pipeline Pilot to load things like spreadsheets and PDFs and docs, and so now our users can independently load internal content and go straight to mining it without intervention of a third party. And these turn up in the I2E interface, and our users can just search the indices and start mining. The example I want to go over today falls under that supplementing database content category, and this has to do with matching compounds to targets. I wanted to pick an example that would resonate both with small companies and large companies, and also show, just how there's a lot of low-hanging fruit ready to be picked. And so the aim in this exercise was to start with a protein name and find all the compounds that target it. It's one thing to, find additional synonyms for particular compounds, but in this case, we're linking them to specific targets or proteins with high precision. The first step in going about this process is to create the queries to fish for the drug names that use the target as bait. And whenever I embark on a text mining exercise, it's really critical to start with a positive control. This allows me to identify the prevailing semantic patterns. We'll get to these in a sec. But really, any positive control is most effective when there are hundreds of papers that will display the range of the way that the target and the compound are linked together in order for you to find the things that you want. So in this example, I'm using PDE5, which is the target of sildenafil in the same sentence. And extra credit points go to anyone out there who knows which Pfizer drug this is. And so if I load that into an I2E query, just using those two words, then three prominent high-precision patterns emerge. There's the brief phrase sildenafil, comma, a specific inhibitor of PDE5. A second example is the PDE5 inhibitor, comma, sildenafil. And then the last example is missing that last comma. We're going to see this posed significant problems for a few years until the most recent release from I2E. Someone out there in the audience guessed right. It is Viagra. The solution to this task was to use I2E's parts of speech query elements. And so now the aim is to convert the patterns from positive control to I2E queries. And so in general, we want blank, some sort of placeholder with and we can have several different kinds of intervening adjectives, and then the name of our target and inhibitor. I'm substituting gene for target. Also, I tested this. This query works with the Entree Gene Dictionary that Linguam provides out of the box. So the parts list that I used for this include the parts of speech that can be found in the I2E classes. One is called entity basic. This is a noun phrase. So not only does it capture inhibitor, which is the noun, modified, in this case, PDE5 is acting as an adjective, but it will also capture a more elaborate adjective that describes more features of this new inhibitor. And then we use the gene dictionary to get all the PDE5 synonyms. Pattern 1 is pretty straightforward. I drop in this noun, this placeholder for a noun phrase, a comma, and then PDE5 inhibitor. And these are the results from I2E output. And we see in the first column that for the most part, other than the last two examples, we're getting exactly what we're looking for. And then seeing the full sentence makes it really easy to double check your work. And these are links to the PubMed article, or you can see it how it gets marked up in I2E. For pattern number 2, it's just a matter of switching things around. And so again, I'm using entity basic and for PDE5 and inhibitor, comma, and then a blank entity basic to grab the drug name. And once again, very high precision. So we have a specific target linked to a specific compound. Third example is the one that really plagued me. And also, this is the one that occurs most frequently, where on my first attempt, I just dropped PDE5 and inhibitor in entity basic. But the downside of this is that that doesn't actually require anything to be following that phrase. So most of the hits I get are just, a bland description of PDE5 inhibitor. It's only at the third hit where I start to see the kinds of things I'm looking for. But unlike the previous two examples, the drug name isn't actually isolated by itself. So it's not something I can easily port over to Excel and drop in a text file and then use as a dictionary, for instance. However, with I2E 3.2, a new kind of box to drop into the query was developed. And I actually was playing around with this for quite a while on my own, and I just couldn't sort it out. But Paul Milligan from the I2E crew came to my rescue and put together a really beautiful query, even has cute names for the column heads. And so I still don't fully understand how this works, but these are word units, and so this combination of an optional word and then a phrase with a word and not a word somehow delivered exactly what I wanted. And so now I can milk this type of statement and get exactly what I'm looking for. This really sets it up for the even more powerful smart query, and so David will be showing the interface where it's much more friendly to a user, and they just see an Entree gene box. They can drop in their gene, and they'll get as output all of the compounds that are associated with that. So it can make it kind of much more accessible to a user community. Then here's proof of the pudding, where I took these terms that came out from the searches, and then I used the alternative list class in the I2E interface to match them against our dictionaries. And I get a lot of new terms out of this, ironically enough, including a PF or internal Pfizer ID is one of the synonyms. My summary slide is really some recommendations. When you embark on a text mining exercise, you want to pick the questions where either the question or the answer requires a dictionary of terms. That's how you're going to get most bang for your buck. It's not necessary to have this criterion, but it really is a strong indicator of a perfect match of tool to question. Secondly, always have an example of a well-studied answer in hand. Then you can make sure you're getting all the kinds of answers you need. Then use results from the example to find the semantic patterns. Parts of speech allow an unlimited array of queries. This is what makes the tool so powerful and so versatile with regard to the different kinds of queries that you can ask. And more importantly, it can allow you to create databases that may be unaffordable or even don't exist yet. The control over the output formatting, the way we saw putting the drug names into their own columns, really makes a difference between having something immediately easy to use or something that has to go through another round of processing. Lastly, if you're considering text mining tools, look and make sure that they play nice with each other and handle many kinds of input files. So that's all.
Yes, I think we'll hold questions until the end. If people have questions based on your presentation or other things they want your perspective on, encourage them to type away, and we will trust you can hang in until the end, and we'll collect those and go through them as much as we can at the end. For now, we're going to move on to our second presenter, one of our two sponsors for today's web symposium. David Millward is the co-founder and chief technology officer for Linguamatics. He has more than 20 years' experience in product development and research in natural language processing, starting at SRI International. He designed the I2E text mining system, which uses a novel interactive approach to information extraction. His PhD is from the University of Cambridge, and he was a researcher and lecturer at the University of Edinburgh before helping launch Linguamatics. David, a warm welcome to you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Agile text mining with Linguamatics I2E. So I'll say a few words about Linguamatics. So we're about 10 years old, and we've offices in Cambridge in the UK and in Boston in the US. And what we provide is the I2E text mining platform, which provides agile, scalable, real-time, natural language processing-based text mining. The earliest adopters of the technology have been in the life sciences, and so we've had it for software used by large pharma since 2003, and currently customers include 9 of the top 10 pharmaceutical companies. The software is actually generic, and it's getting increasing use now in other areas, including government, healthcare, and in other large companies, as well as very small biotechs, for example. First of all, how does text mining differ from search? So search allows you to filter to get to the most relevant documents, but then you tend to have to read the document, and that can be a very time-consuming process, especially if you're looking for questions that have lots of answers. So the kinds of things Phoebe was talking about, where you're looking for inhibitors for a particular gene or protein, if you're looking for all those different compounds, that's a very hard thing to do with a search engine. You have to look through a lot of documents, and it's a very slow process. Text mining allows you to manipulate the text to discover what's there. Traditional text mining tended to take in all of these sets of documents and process it in one go. So you'd have a few patterns, you'd process all the documents in one go, and then create tables of information, for example, one company taking over another company or partnering with another company. And when you're building that structured data, you tend to use the natural language processing so that you can understand how the grammar works in the documents and extract the meaning. You might also use statistical techniques to provide, for example, trends. So again, you may use some of the natural language processing to pull out the meaning, but then use frequency and trending on top of that. If we take text mining, that's giving us the ability to discover. So very similar to what Phoebe showed where she was discovering the different compounds, you can discover various aspects about the documents you're looking for. But traditional text mining meant that queries have to be programmed in, and if you're processing all the documents at once, that processing is going to be slow. In contrast, search provides the ability to filter quickly to the relevant documents, but poor at answering these open questions, things like what are the biomarkers for breast cancer. With Linguamatics, we came to the idea that we really needed to combine the two technologies, combining the text mining with the search, and that allows you then to discover within specific contexts. And that's what we call agile text mining. So an example here is what is a risk factor for diabetes. We can first of all use the search aspect to filter to the context of interest. And so we're looking for constructions like is a risk factor for type 2 diabetes. Now again, we've used some of the linguistics here so that we can generalize from a string like is a risk factor for diabetes to lots of other different constructions. And here it's really important to be able to use the linguistics because you can actually have a few patterns. In this case, this was actually just one pattern, and it picks up thousands of different ways of saying a risk factor for diabetes. So we're using the search and the linguistics to get to a context of interest. And then once we're in a context of interest, we can then discover what's available. And so we can use for wildcards, similar to as Phoebe showed, to pick out candidates for risk factors for diabetes. In this case, we get things like smoking, alcohol intake, diet, excess adiposity. So by combining these two things, the text mining and the search, really allows us to actually go into the data, and we'll see that it also helps to inform the search strategies we come up with. So traditionally with search, you tend to find you've got some noise, you look at document by document, and then you decide how to filter out that noise. In text mining, you can do that a little bit more systematically. So for example, if for our first result, say we're looking for the word cell, and we find that we're getting a lot of noise, and that could potentially from the reference section of a document. Our next step might be to then go and say, okay, well actually we should just look in the body text. For text mining, we can actually ask the question the other way around, just say, well, what regions in the documents does the word cell appear in? And we see that it appears in the body text, the references, the abstract, and the figures. And then we can think, well, actually, the figures may be useful for us in this particular context, so we should include that. So we may come to a better informed decision as to how to filter than if we'd have just gone ahead with our standard search. So this is an example, actually, of full-text documents from Quotas using their sectionalization, which gives you the separation into the references, the figures, and the body text. And Andrew will talk more about that later. What Linguamatics I2E provides is a platform which takes the documents, and similar to a search engine, is going to create an index from those documents. But within that index, you've actually got a lot of extra information than you would have with a standard search engine. So you've got a lot of information about all the different ontologies or thesauri that applying the domain, things like entree gene, things like the mesh ontology. So all of those can be built into the system. And then you've got fast querying over those rich indexes. And you can do queries involving natural language, so linguistic concepts. You can involve various classes, like you can look for any gene, for example, and that will pick up tens of thousands of different genes and the different ways they may be referred to, which may be 10 or 20 or so different synonyms for each of those genes. So it can be looking for effectively hundreds of thousands of terms all at once. You've got regular expression matching, which is useful for things like if you're looking for things like microRNA, where there's specific patterns, but they're not so easy to pick up with just, say, left or right truncation. And you can do chemical substructure and similarity search. You can use the queries in different ways as well. You can use those in an ad hoc way. You can use them, as Phoebe mentioned, as smart queries where you publish the queries that you've developed to other users in a simplified form. You can put queries together, or you can run queries on the command line in a batch mode, and that's useful if you're going to run this kind of process in a workflow, for example, for alerting. And then you're creating structured results, which you can then analyze in different ways, visualize in different ways, and put into structured databases or integrate with other existing structured data. So here's an example of a smart query. We're taking a particular smart query, and we've created a form here, and this form allows us to plug in a particular gene of interest, or in this case, we might put in all genes, looking for the top node of the ontology of entree genes here, and a particular disease. In this case, we've chosen breast cancer. Then we can get out results here, and we've chosen our output to give us genes in the first column, then the relationship, in this case biomarker, and then the disease in the third column. And you can see you're picking out things like is an important prognostic factor in breast cancer. If you click on the links, you get to the highlighted text, And you can again choose which of these items you're going to highlight in the document itself. So saying a little bit about uses in the life sciences, it's been used to answer a wide range of questions. And some of those can be very specific questions, things like dose durations of follow-on clinical trials when you're doing your clinical trial design, things like therapeutic usages of recombinant proteins or cofactors for nuclear receptors. And there's some papers on each of these. And there's a wide range of application areas across the drug pipeline, tending to start in the research area, but now moving right across to the marketing area, and things like monitoring social media, things like Twitter for sentiment. So target prioritization, safety top clinical trials, and various competitive intelligence, especially looking at patents and patent analysis as well. And typically, you're using the software for its ad hoc querying. Sometimes you're using it just as a way of searching for documents, but with a bigger toolbox, so that you've got the regular expressions and the language processing to reduce noise. But also using it to build the vocabularies, improve the search strategies, to create the structured data to then integrate with other information and to summarize the results from multiple different documents. So often it's used to deduplicate things. For example, if you're taking news feeds in, you can, if you extract particular facts, then you can get rid of a lot of the redundancy from different news feeds. And the whole thing is often integrated into existing workflows. If you've got good results, you might want to reproduce them as new data comes in. So some example data sources, so things like competitive intelligence and marketing, the scientific literature, abstracts, for example, Medline, but also things like Embase, full-text journal articles, for example, via Quotas. Patents is increasingly being used now. News, conference abstracts, social media, internal documents. And then specific to the life sciences, things like the clinical trial databases, FDA drug labels, and again, increasingly electronic health records, especially if there's interest from pharmaceuticals in things like the relative efficacy of drugs and mining the electronic health records to give evidence of that. Those are some examples which data sources that customers have brought into their own systems, the enterprise software, but we also provide a cloud-based service which currently has Medline and patent full text from USPTO, WIPO, and EPO, and that's going to also include other patent offices as during this year. We're also adding things like clinical trials to the on-demand service, and that will keep on increasing. To give some example results, so the first one is a bit more detail on the biomarker example. So we're picking out the particular genes from Entree and actually extended with UniProt for proteins. We're looking at you've got particular linguistic constructions, things like as a new potential biomarker for, is significant prognostic factor in, to be a promising prognostic indicator. So these are relatively complex constructions, but again, we can use one or two linguistic patterns to pick these out. As Phoebe mentioned, numerical data is often very important, and so in this example, we're looking for safety effects, but we're interested in the particular dosage of interest. So we're picking out things like 15 milligrams per kilogram per day, the dosage here. We're picking out nephrotoxicity, and we're associating that in this case with the tissue. So taking nephrotoxicity of kidney and pulling out the safety issues clustered for the particular drug. So the right-hand arrows here can be expanded, and those give all the different toxicity effects for that particular drug. So this is very much a compacted view with all of these arrows closed. You can also do indirect relationships. So this is important, and it's something that you really can't do at all manually. So if you're interested in, say, angiogenesis and the relationship to particular drugs, you may not find any documents which mentions the drug and the angiogenesis together. So in that case, you're then interested in seeing if you can get a process. So can you find one document which takes you from thalidomide to TNF, for example, and another document takes you from TNF to angiogenesis? If you have that combination, then you can combine the information from the different documents and get an inference out that thalidomide may have an effect on angiogenesis through its effect on TNF. So these indirect relationships are something you can directly do from the literature, and alternatively, you can export your text mine results as, for example, RDF triples and then plug those in. And it's very similar to what people do with the semantic web, where they're doing indirect linking through the RDF triples. An example of clinical trials analysis, this is one using pipeline pilot visualization. So we have components to fit into pipeline pilot for indexing and for querying. Here we've used pipeline pilot visualization of a heat map, and this is looking for particular conditions next to particular interventions across the clinical trial databases. So seeing what clinical trials have been undertaken for Alzheimer's disease, for example. So focusing on Alzheimer's disease and one particular drug in this case, we can then look at the sponsors of the particular trial. We can look at the date when the trial started and ended, and we can look at the particular phase of the trial, in this case indicated by the color coding. So this gives us a very quick way to look at the clinical trial data and get an idea of the landscape of drug testing for particular conditions. A slightly different area, but one which was also used quite a lot in the patent area with I2E, is clustering and categorizing patterns. And here, using both the ontologies and the linguistics to cluster the patterns together, in this case by disease area. So we're interested in neoplasms, and then for breast neoplasms, we've got 182 documents, and this is just showing the first of those, one particular US patent document. But we can use the linguistics to make sure that we're getting the disease in a suitable context within the document, and it's not in a case where it might be something like no family history of disease or not relevant to this disease. We can also do things like linking within complex documents. So with the very long patent documents, we may be interested in asking for things like compounds with particular substructures where you have a value reported. So in this particular example, we're looking at a particular compound. We're seeing that occurred as example 12, and then we're finding later in the document that for example 12, we have an EC50 value of 8. And we're pulling that out now in the table to show the compound, the fact that we've found a particular inhibition metric of an EC50 and a value of 8 nanomoles. We can also do things like claim chaining, where we're looking at a method of claim 12, and then we can actually, so here we're looking for the term chemotherapeutic. We found it in claim 14, and then in claim 14, it's talking about claim 12, and then in claim 12, it talks about claim 10, and so we can keep on chaining down and showing the different claims in the dependency. To conclude, Agile text mining with Linguamatics I2E gives you query power and flexibility. It allows you to address that long tail of less predictable questions, which is very hard, but typically searchers spend a lot of time on. One of our customers called it queries of arbitrary complexity, because you can combine together things like co-occurrence at the sentence level or a region level. You can combine that with precise linguistic patterns, with ontologies, with regular expression matching, with different regions, numerical expressions, or chemical substructure similarity. You can combine together all these different methods in a very flexible way, and that gives you different kinds of filters to get to different kinds of results. You can also use the data itself, as we've seen, to inform our search strategies and to build terminologies. And you've got flexible, structured outputs to integrate with existing structured data and to fit into existing workflows. So this gives you a wide application of text mining, whether you want to search, extract, or categorize your documents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Kevin Davis back with you. I'm going to squeeze in a couple of questions we've had from the audience because they're specific to your presentation. Gary wants to know, to what extent has I2E been used to extract or convert free text in protocols to searchable data, for example, inclusion and exclusion criteria? Could you take that one?
Yes, we've actually done quite a lot of work on exclusion and inclusion criteria. And it's a very interesting case because you have things like the inclusion criterion, which will also say, but not including patients with certain diseases. So you need to mix the idea of what region you're in other words, the inclusion criterion, but also you need to do the linguistics to cope with negations, for example. So yes, we have a few customers using extraction from inclusion and exclusion criteria at the moment.
Okay, excellent. The other questions, David, I'll have you take offline using the chat box that are specific to you. I want to move on and welcome our third and final presenter, Andrew Carver from Quotas. Andrew is the General Manager for Europe for Quotas, which is now an Elsevier company, thanks to the acquisition by the publishing giant a few months ago. Andrew is a Cambridge graduate and has worked for many years in high-tech business development and consultancy. He works directly with Quotas' academic, government, and commercial customers to help them optimize their research information infrastructures. Andrew, a warm welcome to you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you all for your time today. I'm going to talk to you about what we do with text mining, but first wanted to start with a brief introduction about who we are and where we've come from, in case you're not aware of that. So Quotas is a provider of software, very often as a service, usually around workflows that involve the scientific literature and related documents, some with a substantial content management solutions, others not so much. And we've been serving the life sciences market since around 2000, so we've been doing this for over 10 years. And in that time, we've gone very widely adopted in pharmaceutical and biotech firms in particular, with a representation of over 50% in the top 25 and quite a strong representation outside of that as well. So we were acquired in January of this year by Elsevier, so now part of the Elsevier family, and this is able to provide you with this element of functionality. What precisely is that functionality? Well, the main and primary function we perform, which actually was well described by Phoebe earlier on, is our role in the workflows that you've had Phoebe and David talk about in retrieving full text for scientific journal articles and the collation of that with the metadata into a format in XML form, in particular for mining by NLP engines like I2E. But before saying how we do that and what's involved, I thought it worth saying a little bit about why our customers tend to want to do the text mining with full text in the first place. I think Phoebe gave a couple of very good reasons for that already, and I don't want necessarily to speak at a huge amount of depth to this slide, but the main reasons here are, first of all, quite a large number of cases, you simply aren't finding the terms that you're looking for in the abstract or the associated metadata. Phoebe gave a nice example of where terms are appearing that are of interest to you that are not actually captured by the abstract. There are all sorts of reasons for that, and obviously the most simple one is the abstract and cannot cover everything. In addition to that, there's also the fact that, the relationships that you're looking for may be more easily found by the fullness of the full text, so to speak, than in the limited number of sentences that you find in the abstract. And obviously, if you're trying to qualify things by in vivo versus in vitro and such like, that may also not be captured in the abstract itself. And then the third point I've got here is very much in line with the desire to pursue the open question of fishing for information which is not actually in your initial search. And clearly you need full text in order to find associations that are not necessarily there in the abstract at all. Beyond that, we've seen value in being able to target figure and table descriptions. And in many cases, the desire to work with full text is already there in the first place. The idea of using text mining is more to replace some manual curation of full text rather than, the other way around. So here, where you've decided that what you're trying to do is to use text mining tools instead of manual curation in relation to full text, then it's just straightforward that that's what you want to do. We've even had a case where someone has said, well, I'd like to work with the figures specifically because I want to re-engineer the data points behind the figures, but I have to say that's something that we cannot quite do yet. So the workflows I wanted to talk to are really three fairly straightforward cases. And the first, and you might say the primary one, is where someone does a search initially for a set of documents rather than for a set of insights, and from that they want to collect a corpus of documents to which to use for text mining. Then the second case is more the automation of that process, which we can help with. And the third is, well, what happens after I've done some text mining and I have some valuable insights, perhaps not just for myself, but which might be useful to more end users, particularly end users of some shared literature database. So going to the manual search and export for natural language processing, this is very much as Phoebe described earlier. With Quota, and our main tool here for the purpose is a desktop application called Quota Information Manager Platinum version. You can search on a range of gateways of your choice to find a set of documents that would be of interest to you. And from that, we then becomes a very easy matter to import the full text to which you have rights of access, and to export that in an XML set, which includes key citation information, body text, and in fact some sectionalization of that text, which I'll come to in a moment. This then is picked up, again, either manually or perhaps in some automated fashion by an NLP engine such as Linguamatics I2E, and then that's driven by the end user of that to get the kind of results you've seen David show. So basically, just to kind of recap on what's going on here, is you're able to make a search of a fairly wide kind in a platform like PubMed or Embase.com or some such to effectively identify the corpus of articles you're interested in, and from that then you get a set of full text with metadata which you can then process through a text mining engine. So then just to say a little bit more then about what's going on in that XML, and particularly in the sectionalization of that, the XML being delivered out is a set of articles. You can see article with citation set. Each article in there has citation information, which is mineable, and then you come to a full text section. And in the full text section, you'll see that we are now, for a large number, the majority of articles in a typical search for someone who has a fairly broad range of subscriptions, for a fairly large number of articles there, we're able to section out figures, references, and tables into separate sections from the main body text. In addition to being able to do it for all three of those elements, we're able, in the very large, sort of 95% of cases, to actually section out references, and that's done where we're not going to an HTML or XML source, which is what we do for the sort of three-way sectionalization, but just to a PDF source. So essentially we're going to this HTML and increasingly in the future XML for the major publishers or publisher platforms, as we like to think of them, and bringing back the three-way sectionalization. And then for the long tail of other publishers, we're able to do the reference sectionalization out from that. So what might be the benefits of this? I think you've seen some of this a little bit in David's presentation, and in particular, the main and sort of driving thing that brought us to this in the first place is that in the titles, in particular, of bibliographies of articles, you do get quite a lot of false positives if you're not particularly interested in the bibliography. And I was just looking at one this morning which had a huge bibliography, and it was a really good thing to be able to take that out. So that's the main, I guess, sort of main big win, the low-hanging fruit. But in addition, we get out figures and tables, and that has a sort of twofold benefit. One is that you can go for that directly. It's perhaps of significant interest that a figure is including words that you're interested in. But it's also valuable in that we're able to sort of remove those sections from out of the flow of the full text and provide some continuity of sentences in the full text. And that really leads me on to the third point here, which is that when we're doing this, the full text is much cleaner. We're able to sort of not have spurious text that tends to come into PDFs, and we're able to have much less interruption of the sentences, in fact, in the body text as a result of taking out effectively text boxes. I think it's most easily visualized, that sort of benefit, by looking at what might happen if you were using perhaps a typical PDF conversion of a case like the one you now see hopefully in the slide in front of you. So we've got the first page on the left-hand side is 2 columns of text. Then we have a landscape presented, main portion of a table. The third page is the rest of that table, another column of text. So a normal sort of PDF conversion of this has rather curious behavior in some ways. The first page is done fine. We then pick up some the word Springer, which we don't really want, go into the table, and then from the end of the first page of the table, we then carry on with the full text, and then the end of that column, the main body text, I should say, at the end of the column on the third page, we jump back into the table, and then et cetera, et cetera. So you can see this is far from ideal if you're trying to effectively understand sentences with relationships in them. So if we are applying the sectionalization method to what we're doing, the benefits are obviously we get out the references. You don't see that in this particular case, but we see that the main text is not interrupted in the way it might otherwise be. The tables are separated out, and the tables themselves are presented in an uninterrupted and entire form. So that's really the manual search process where we're working with an ANI gateway of some kind to get a corpus of articles, get the full text, put it into an XML format for text mining. So what about the second use case? This is using some kind of automated platform like Pipeline Pilot. And here we're really talking about just making the whole process much more automated, either driven by a query in the first place or perhaps driven by something that's been set up as an alert. I think you heard Phoebe earlier say that after the production of the XML, they have Pipeline Pilot scripted to pick it up and then put it into I2E and work with it there. So that piece, you can already see even in the case where you have a manual front end. What we're doing here is putting more automation into that front end. So you might have front end would present it to the user, which is not Quota, maybe something like Pipeline Pilot, where they start the process off with some kind of query that's expanded or limited in particular ways to get the right vocabulary. It might result in some pre-processing on abstract level to reduce it to a smaller set. It might not. Either way, it effectively comes as a new set, a new query of some kind or a set of IDs that needed to be processed, and that's applied just as in the same way as I've described for the manual process to working with a gateway, retrieving the full text, and converting that into an export. And the process works essentially by having the pre-processing produce an input file, which Quota can pick up and work with, and then the post-process work with the output file, which it can then pick up and process. So the final thing I wanted to talk about, the third use case, was adding text mining insights to literature databases. When you have done that processing and found out some interesting information, there are all sorts of things you might do with it, but quite a lot of our customers have some kind of literature database which is used by different departments in the company, and very often the question might then arise, why not take the value of at least some of this text mining activity and make it more visible to end users of that literature database so they can effectively get the benefit of the work that's been done on that. And I present here just a very crude, this is not a real-life case of a version of how you kind of might want to present that. So here you've got the listing from a search result on the database, and you can see we're highlighting that certain assertions actually to be associated with this article, and in relation to those assertions, here are some snippets or extracts that actually support that, just as you've seen in those Excel spreadsheets from David. So how is that actually achieved? Well, here you can see on the left-hand side the same process I've described already through of actually finding the corpus, then retrieving the full text and producing the XML export. This is then text mined with something like I2E, and then what all you need to do is to have that process produce some kind of output in a regular format by XML, where the relevant tags, the relevant snippets, and the relevant article IDs are actually then available for import into Quota. And then when we import it, we can then blend that into the information we have on those articles in the literature database and expose them to end users. So that's really my piece. And just to recap what it is, the Quota becomes involved in the text mining piece through both manual searches on external gateways to identify a corpus and allow that to be mined, but also for doing that in an automated fashion and then thirdly, for being able to expose the insights to end users on a literature databases. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Another excellent presentation, and I want to take questions that are coming in live from the audience, as well as some that people had submitted over the last 24 hours or so. And we'll try to squeeze in as many of those as we can in the next, 10 or 15 minutes or so. A few that came in, Andrew, while you were speaking, so I'll put these first to you, but we'll have David and Phoebe on standby and unmuted so that they can chime in if they would like. A couple of people asked about supplementary materials. Is Quotas able to sectionalize supplementary materials?
That's certainly something we're thinking about. It's not something we do right now. Does need to be a relatively standard way in which we can acquire those. But in principle, there's no reason why we cannot go in that direction.
Because it's my impression that more and more material is being shunted into the supplementary materials. Would you agree that's probably quite an important thing to address?
Yes, I think it is. It's one of those areas where you kind of wish publishers would all standardize on what they do, because that's always the difficulty in dealing with these issues. But it is certainly something we need to think about. I think in some ways it hopefully will be. It will be tackled probably by going more towards XML as the format which we use for getting the raw information. And then if publishers are actually combining all the information in the XML which they make available, as distinct from how you see it through an HTML and web page world, then it'll make it a lot easier.
Katerina, and I'm going to bring David in as well for this one, are Quotas and Linguamatics appropriate or good to use for semantic analysis when she's not looking necessarily for a particular keyword?
So I'm not sure whether I entirely understand the question, but you certainly can use it in the kind of bulk way. So people do use, for say, pulling out all the protein-protein interactions or all the gene-disease relationship. So in those cases, you've not got a prior particular disease or particular gene you're interested in, but just want to take out everything to feed into a database. And you've also got the ability, you're using the wildcards so that you can see what are all the different possibilities in a particular area. So that gives you a good way of sanity checking your vocabularies as well as actually developing new vocabularies. You can actually check how much coverage you're getting with your existing vocabularies. So Katerina was actually talking about sentiment analysis. So yes, sentiment analysis is something we've been doing an increasing amount of in the last couple of years. And even for something like Twitter, we weren't sure how much linguistic processing you'd really need. It actually turned out that you really do need it, because there's a huge variety in the way that people will express the same concept. And the linguistic processing means you can capture that with a few patterns. And you also need to really deal with things like sarcasm or conditionals. So people will say things like, if I took this drug, or this product should be good, for example, whereas it doesn't actually mean they think it actually is good at the moment. So you really have to look at the linguistic context around the terms to prune out otherwise very noisy material.
Any other comments on sentiment analysis?
This is Phoebe. We've used it for that on some non-canonical text sources, but it did involve building a specialized vocabulary.
Okay, great. Let me move on to another question. We've had a couple of references to the cloud, and Chris wants to know, can anyone put PubMed Central in a cloud for access?
So the freely accessible part of PubMed Central certainly could be. Most of PubMed Central, I think, is still licensed source. So I think I forget what proportion it is, but it's something like 10 or 20% is actually open at the moment.
Okay. Gary asked, to what extent has your work been used with mining text from clinical notes in electronic medical records? Andrew, do you want to start with that one?
It's probably more.
It may be more appropriate for David.
Yeah.
Yes, so it is being used for mining electronic health records, and there's kind of a lot of different applications there. It's relatively early relative to the scientific literature, but we have, for example, a West Coast health provider who's using it to look into particular records and work out what the likely diagnosis was given the particular symptoms being described. We've also got, there's, I think, increasing interest in using the electronic health records for doing the comparative studies for the different drugs, where you really need to now give a lot of evidence about how the drug may save money long term, and really there's no way of doing that other than really looking at the electronic health records. So it's certainly an area which is where it's being used, and we see a lot of likely expansion in that area. And a lot of the techniques are really important for that area, the ability to look at the different regions of the document, to be able to sort of use either linguistics or use the structure of the document. It's particularly the electronic health records, the context is really important to understand the different terms of that.
Carol Friedman has a very nice paper that's indexed in PubMed about that, and she demonstrates how to use the document sections in the record to kind of impose a temporal order of events.
Could you give, I think I was speaking over you, Phoebe, could you give that reference again?
Sure. Carol Friedman from Columbia University, and it's, I think, Mining Clinical Text. That's not the title, but that's enough keywords to get you there.
Published roughly when?
In the early 2000s.
Okay, great. We have dodged so far the question of pricing, but Samina asks what's on everybody's mind is whether these resources that we've heard described today are freely accessible or not. So Andrew, let me start with you, and then we'll bring David back.
So our tool is licensed to end users on corporate basis, according to, generally speaking, the number of users, and it's priced as an annual subscription. So obviously, any institution who wants to kind of discuss pricing in more detail is welcome to get in touch with me or with their Elsevier account manager.
So ours is rather similar. So we tend to have annual or multi-year licenses, and it tends to be by named users or by concurrent users.
Andrew, that begs the question whether the acquisition by Elsevier, will that have any significant impact on the implementation of Quotas in other organizations? Is it in some way going to be tied to Science Direct, or will it still be available as a sort of a freestanding tool?
I think it's going to continue to be available as a freestanding tool. I mean, there might be, I can't sort of, speak ahead of the event, but there might be cases where effectively we're able to bundle more functionality from Elsevier all in one go. But we're completely committed to, supporting all these various gateways that we work through so that the end user can use their preferred tool for identifying the initial corpus of articles. And I should also say we're completely committed to, providing access to articles from all publisher sources as well, in case there's any sense that anyone might not think that.
All right. We got a few questions in over the last 24, 48 hours, as I said, just in running up to the Web Symposium. I want to quickly go through some of those in case these are important for people still on the line. Some technical questions, and please, anyone, short answers, but just anybody jump in. Firstly, are temporal relations among extracted data sets and data entities being modeled? Temporal relations among extracted data sets and data entities, are they being modeled?
So that tends to be a mixture of, often you're getting temporal information from the metadata of the particular annotations in the document. Things like clinical health records will have the temporal aspect there. You can also be mining it using the linguistic processing as well, if there are particular mentions in the document about the order of things and when things occurred. I don't know, and Phoebe was talking about Carol Friedman's paper on that as well, I think.
So I think relativity is straightforward. So when one event happens relative to another, and which one happened first, extracting and imposing exact timelines, I think, really depends on how well structured the data are. If it's only in a graph, that would seem pretty challenging.
Another question that came in recently, how can one exploit text mining tools to reconstruct metabolic network models? Anyone go for that one?
So that's something that I'm pretty sure we've had customers work on. I haven't personally worked on that, but I think it is an application that's been used with the tools.
Okay, let me just go back to the ones that came in during the broadcast. Chris is back wanting to know, what are the options of intersecting with databases such as Kimball, but avoiding circularity? Can you pass that question?
So I can make a few comments. So generally, you can use databases in different ways. So often, things like the indirect relationships we showed, often you can use the structured data as one half of that. So you may be taking information from a text and then combining that with structured information, and together that gives you an indirect relationship, pulling the two bits together. But there's also use of the databases, something like KEBI, you're using that can be used as a thesaurus, so you can use that to give you a source of synonyms and classes of chemical. So often the databases are used as well for the kind of construction of a sensible taxonomy and thesauri. And then thirdly, you can actually sort of integrate them within the sort of query operators in I2E, and you can actually index structured data in I2E as well, because there tends to be a lot of free text fields in the structured data. And so we actually do conversion, for example, from database formats into XML, so that then we can access both the structured data fields and the unstructured data fields within a database.
Okay, I think that pretty much does it. I want to bring Phoebe back just for a last word. Phoebe, the last time one of the last occasions we encountered you was in a previous biopharma in the Boston area, where you were still, as I recall, working with both Linguamatics and Quota. It appears that both you're finding productive uses for both tools in a sort of a workflow situation. I wonder if you could just comment on their value now that you're with a different organization, and the degree to which, perhaps sort of summarize the degree to which they are used by discovery teams and other teams across the organization. I'm just curious whether this is still a rather specialized application that requires people to seek out specialists such as yourself and your team, or whether these are tools that are becoming more easy to use by rank and file researchers.
Good question. So it really has to do with the kind of ebb and flow of people moving through the organization, and which members of the organization embrace these technologies. And so at points we've had a very large user base of both tools, but in part they do involve having an internal sponsor to promote them. So I think
Excellent.
usability increases the larger user community that you have.
Okay, great. Well, I think we need to leave it there. We've squeezed in about 15 minutes worth of questions, and I realize that people have many other commitments in the course of the day. I want to thank our three expert speakers, Phoebe Roberts from Pfizer, David Millwood from Linguamatics, and Andrew Carver from Quota, and Linguamatics and Quota for putting together and sponsoring today's webcast. Thanks to all of my colleagues for their help in putting together today's program, and most of all of you for listening and for many excellent questions. The contact information for our three presenters is on the screen. I'm sure they won't object if you have a specific question that we weren't able to address. Please contact them directly, whether you're interested in acquiring some of these tools, or you have a more technical question about their usage. I'm sure they'll get to those when they can. So on behalf of my colleagues from CHI and BioIT World, thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us again soon for another BioIT World Web Symposium. I'm Kevin Davis. For all my colleagues, thank you. Bye-bye for now.